If one of you can please unmute and confirm whether you can see my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, as the title slide says, it's academic writing. We'll first know what is academic writing and what are the conventions of academic writing. Now, remember, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that academic writing is different from creative writing in one very important way. What is it? In academic writing, you are expected to follow certain well-defined processes and conventions which may not be required when you are in creative writing, like writing a poem or writing a novel or writing a play, right? Academic writing will expect that when you are creating something through academic writing, you will be following certain processes. Okay. So what are the processes that go into academic writing? Before we go to the processes, the first question that often comes to a young student's mind at the undergraduate level is that why do I need to study what academic writing is, or what are the processes of academic writing, and what are the advantages or benefits that I will be having if I somehow improve or even master academic writing, right? These are the three main reasons why academic writing is important to us in the academic sphere. What is it? The first is clarity and credibility. These are very, very important topics. What is clarity? Clarity is the ability to express yourself with precision and with little or no ambiguity of understanding. That is, when you are writing something with a very, very clear statement of purpose or clear statements which are not ambiguous, which people will not misunderstand or interpret differently, then we can say that you have clarity in your writing, right? This is the first. The other C is credibility, right? What does credibility mean? Credibility means the thing that you are writing should carry a sense of believability among the people who are reading or hearing. That is, if you are telling something which is grossly uh, mm, incredulous, people will hear and immediately say that no, this is not something which is believable. If this comes into your academic writing will suffer, because credibility is one of the important hallmarks of academic writing. And remember, academic writing also includes your answers in your examinations, right? Whether it's a 10 marks question that you are answering, or whether it's a 5 marks question that you are answering, you will also have to follow certain golden rules or principles of academic writing, right? This is the first. The second C is critical thinking. That is, in a creative writing, like you're writing a poem or you're writing a short story or a novel, you will require critical thinking, but the most of it will be carried by creative thinking. You're creating something new, maybe a new story or a new turn in the plot, things like that, or a new image. Like But in critical thinking, you have to organize your ideas. You have to evaluate how powerful your ideas are. And you also have to think what others may say about your work after reading it. So, when you are in academic writing, one important critical area is whether your writing answers certain questions which you think your readers or your audience may ask. That is, you have to know beforehand, right? For example, if you arrive home late, for example, maybe you will have to prepare yourself beforehand to answer the question from a guardian as to why you are late. Like here too, in academic writing too, when you are writing an essay or an answer or whatever, one important area of a good academic writing is how critically the anti-arguments are already taken into focus and defended. Right? This is the second thing. The third thing is, through academic writing, you can enter the scholarly community of peers, fellow students, teachers. Like in examination, it's your examiner. In a seminar, it's your fellow students, fellow friends, peers, and your teachers. Right? So, academic writing is also a gateway to the scholarly community outside. For example, later on, as our first semester progresses, we will be organizing student seminars. What would that mean? That would mean we will give you a topic on which you will be required to prepare a paper, and on a specific date, you will be required to present the paper before your fellow students, before your teachers, as well as some other guests, teachers who may come from other places to judge who has written the best. Right? So, you are required in academic writing to not only master the art of critical writing, but also to master the art of critical presentation, oral presentation. So here, written writing does not always mean writing alone. Okay, you have to write a paper, you have to present it. So it's both a writing and an oral presentation. You can use PowerPoints as well to present your ideas, things like that. Okay. Now the main point is, how does the process begin? Actually, there are 6 stages that transforms a blank page into a polished academic paper. In other words, a patent question that often comes or gets asked is, what are the essential stages of academic writing? Right. There are 6 stages. What are they? The first is this, remember, pre-writing and brainstorming. That is, you are identifying an area on which you will be writing a critical essay. Right? So for that, you have to first identify the area, the scope of the area, and the key points that you are to include in your academic writing. Right? The second is to brainstorm. That is, to write the points, judge which are the points which will be finally included and which won't be included, and often ask yourself certain questions. Why am I writing this? What is the value of the statement? Is the statement vague or is the statement precise? Things like that. These are a brainstorming where you are pondering or thinking within your own mind as to what are the points that you will include, what is the process that you will adopt, and other various important functionalities of academic writing. Now, the third is to narrow your focus. This is very important. For example, if you think of writing a paper on, let's say, use of the internet in education, right? This is a very, very broad topic. Internet is a very vast term. It includes a lot of technological or technical weight and aspects. And unless you do justice to all of them, your academic paper will be weak or incomplete, right? So in order to overcome this, what you have to do, you have to narrow your focus, right? Like, for example, the use of the Google search in English studies. This is much more precise. Why? Because internet was a huge term in the previous example. Now we are specifying or narrowing it to only one aspect of the internet, which is what? Google search. Right? In the earlier topic, you had education, which is a vast area. Here you are narrowing it to English studies. So you are omitting out a lot. And why are you omitting out? Because your thesis or your paper or your answer, whatever, will be more manageable if the area is narrow. If the area is wide, then maybe you will require an enormous amount of time, resources to do justice to the area, like a PhD thesis. Well, a PhD thesis will have to be written on an area that is sufficiently broad so that it can give an evidence of a very deep and wide critical and evaluative power. For example, we will have a PhD thesis of, let's say, 400 printed pages, right? In contrast, your answer to a university question of 10 marks will roughly be around 250 to 300 words. So obviously, the question or the area that will be required in an examination day will be narrow and not as wide as, let's say, a PhD thesis, right? So either way, you have to narrow your focus to match it with the scope of your work, whether it's an answer that you are writing or whether you are writing a PhD thesis, right? Now, once this is done, you have to do an element of research. Now, what does research mean? Research means to judge and find out previous work done on a similar or related subject. Because remember, if you are repeating something which has already been done before, you are not doing serious academic writing. Because serious academic writing will require of you to contribute something new to an area of knowledge that is already there. That is why you often tell when you are preparing your answers, please don't memorize, because you are memorizing the same note which hundreds of your fellows peers are also memorizing. So what is the newness in it? You will suffer, the value of your answer will suffer merely because you are not doing anything new, right? So one aspect of research is to know what has been written on the topic earlier in journals, books, internet resources, etc. The second aspect is identification of primary source and secondary source. I'll give you one example. Like, you are asked to present a paper on William Shakespeare's Hamlet, the play, right? Now, when you are researching on Hamlet, William Shakespeare's Hamlet, the text of Hamlet, the original text, that will be a primary source, because that is the basis on which your actual research rests. The secondary source is works written by others on the primary source, that is on Hamlet. Others have written on Hamlet. There are thousands and thousands of books, papers in journals, etc. on Hamlet. Those will form your secondary sources, right? And the third thing is to keep a note on whose work you are using when, right? This is very, very important, because very often we suffer from the concept of, or rather we suffer from an evil of plagiarism. You will often hear this term, plagiarism. Plagiarism means lifting something from someone, some work, without acknowledging their authorship, right? Like, you were writing a paper on Shakespeare's Hamlet. In the internet, you come across a paper which you feel matches with your area or topic, and you copy and paste it. Right? Without acknowledging. No, so what does that mean? That means people will say that you have cheated on someone's work while doing your own. Right? So this is very, very important. Whenever you are doing a research that requires a lot of consultation with other works, it is very, very important to keep a record of each of these works and the citations that you are using, because later on, maybe if it's a thesis that you are working on 6 months later or 1 year later, you will be asked or you will be required to quote them as acknowledgements in the references, without which that person may claim that he or she has copied something from me. It is a case of plagiarism, right? So therefore, instead of leaving it for the future, it is always better to keep a note of it, right? So these are the three very common resources, steps that you have to keep in mind from day one of any academic writing. Now comes the actual work of the academic writing, which is what? Identifying a topic. Here we call it a thesis statement. And what would that mean? I'll give you a couple of examples. First thing, the example that is already there on the screen. For example, if you're asked to write a thesis on, or you identify an area, which is what? Which is climate change is a problem. Now, climate change is a problem. This is rather an essay, not a thesis. Why? Simply because here the scope of your work is so vast and broad that it may not be possible for you to actually wind up okay wind up what one climate change is a problem. Everybody knows climate change is a problem, so what is new here? So therefore the topic is vague. As you can see, it makes no argument and offers no direction for the paper. What is this paper about? Right? A strong thesis statement would be this. Notice, industrialized nations must adopt carbon taxes by 2030 to prevent irreversible ecological collapse. This is a specific, arguable, and actionable topic, and it gives the paper a clear purpose. For example, when you are using this title, people will immediately understand that here is a paper on what industrialized nations should do by 2030 to prevent ecological collapse. Very specific, right? So therefore, same is the case with the sentences that you write. This is not only a case with only the title. The title has to be clear and specific, right? This goes also with the sentences that you write in a thesis or in any answer. It has to be very precise, focused, and the reader will immediately understand that, look, he is through this sentence telling this and nothing else. This is what we mean by being specific. I often tell my students, or give my students the example of a tailor. We often make our dresses by going to a tailor and either asking him or her to take my exact measurements. Why? So that it fits me. Or I give the tailor a dress which I already have, which fits me well, so that the tailor can get the measurement from that and prepare a new one. Right? Therefore, whenever you are writing something, same is the case. The idea that you have in your mind should be very precisely expressed in the exact nuance in your writing. Right? So it should not be something like this. You are thinking something else and you are actually writing something else on paper. That should never happen. And this usually comes with practice. The more you practice, the better is your ability to write precise statements. Right? The next is what we need to do. We need to develop an outline of the paper. Now remember, outlines of the paper, they are like very often what we know in any term in any, let's say in gaming terms, as the plan of your paper. What are the points that you have to include? What are the specific areas that you will cover? And how you desire to conclude your paper, right? So these all falls under what we know as outlining or structure. The first is an introduction. Remember, one of the first principles of a good introduction is that the moment you write the first few sentences of the introduction, your ability to attract your readers will be finalized. This is what I mean on the screen with the word hook, that you are attracting your readers into reading something which your readers may find interesting immediately within the first few sentences, right? The second is the background, and the third is a clear statement of purpose, right? Followed by paragraphs. Like in your 10-mark answers, you'll be having, it is expected that you'll be like framing your answers on paragraphs. The paragraphs may be small, it may be brief, but nevertheless they will be necessary. Why? Because the paragraphs will actually give an idea to the reader as to how you have structured your arguments on analysis, right? And the third and the final aspect is the conclusion, where you sum up the main ideas or arguments of the paper, you synthesize the concepts into one, and finally, this is also very important, you comment on the implications of the paper. That is, why is this paper important? And what are the areas that are required to be focused on by other researchers after reading your paper? That is, you will never claim that your paper answers all research questions on the topic. That is never possible, right? So what you have to do, you have to also tell that these are the areas which will require further research. That is, I am unable to focus on those areas because of by paucity of time or resources, but these areas may be worked upon by other researchers while working on this. This is what we mean by implications, right? Remember, a good answer or a good paper or a good thesis is actually a product of a strong outline, because it keeps you and your paper very precise. It stops you from lingering from one area to another and thereby losing the purpose of your writing, right? For example, if you come across someone who is either doing a PhD or has completed a PhD or successfully written a thesis, if you ask them, one of the primary areas which they focused on in the initial days of the research was dividing the thesis into chapters. The first chapter will be introduction, obviously. The second is this, the third is this, the fourth is this, the fifth is this, the sixth may be a conclusion. So the introduction and the conclusion are there. But how do you title your papers? That is very, very significant, because the chapters and their titles will actually keep your focus intact on the work that you'll be doing, let's say in the case of a PhD for the next 3 years, or in the case of an answer of the university exam for the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes, right? And remember, one of the important negative aspects of academic writing that we often encounter either in papers or in individual answers in university exams or things like that, is the question is actually the area which is asking you to focus on. Okay, so the wording of the question is very important because that is your focus here. In a PhD thesis, it is the title of a chapter, for example, but in an university exam, it is the question. So therefore, we often have this experience as teachers and students that if you get an uncommon paper, right, we find many students coming back from the examination hall and telling that these sir, the paper has been disastrous, not a single question was common, and I could not write anything from memory. I just stopped and wrote, and the answers were very small. Very often we find that students who are complaining like this of uncommon papers, they tend to score well in those papers which they tell uncommon, compared or contrasted to the papers which they say is quote unquote common. Why? Because the very fact that the questions are uncommon to you and you have to read the question repeatedly in order to write your points means your answers are automatically getting focused. You don't have the pressure of reproducing what you have memorized from previous note, which may not actually mean the same thing in terms of content as the question that is asked, right? So therefore, we get enough, I mean, very regular examples of students telling and ultimately scoring more in the uncommon papers. Why? Because automatically, because the fact that they cannot reproduce anything from memory or anything from pre-learning, as it were. Whatever they are writing, they're thinking, and that thinking is actually grounded or focused in the topic of the question. These answers are much more precise and they are better academic works. You may subjectively think that questions are not common, therefore my examination is bad, but the examiner will think otherwise, because while reading your paper, he will find or she will find that the points that you have used appear to be spontaneous and appear to be very well connected to the topic that is asked in the question. Right? So this is very, very important. The idea of being grounded to the topic that is asked or that is researched. Right? So, yes, this is the next idea. What is it? Drafting. You first begin writing freely. Remember, as the screen says, the goal of the first draft is always to get the ideas down, not to be perfect. Follow your outline, but allow ideas to evolve naturally as you write. Okay. And the third thing is, when you are writing your paper, you leave these third bracketed citations even empty, so that you can add the citations later when you are finalizing the draft. So, citations means the acknowledgement of ideas which come through other writers. Okay. And remember the tagline at the bottom of the screen. Perfectionism is the enemy of the first draft. So we find many students searching for the perfect answer and failing to do so. There is no such thing as a perfect academic writing or a perfect academic work. Even a work that has undergone 100 revisions will have imperfections. Okay, so you need not be perfect in your work, but you must not make obvious mistakes, which will bring down the value of your work. Right? So these are the essential tidbits of the preliminary processes or steps of academic writing. Okay. In my next class with you, which will be tomorrow at the same time online, tomorrow's class will also be online, right? At the same time of 7:30, we will be examining in detail the conventions and processes with regard to citations, with regard to styling of the citations. Individual subjects will have individual different citation styles. We'll see it. Okay. So much for today. If you have any questions or any queries on what I have presented today, you may please unmute yourself and ask. Any questions, any queries on anything which has been said? By the way, I'll be editing the recording of the class and uploading it and sharing the link with you so that you can see or read them later. Okay. If you have any queries, you can unmute yourself or ask. And since we are at the fag end of the class, I will ask all of you to retype your names in the chat box so that today's attendance can be transferred. And another announcement, as I've just said, tomorrow we'll have the same class online from 7:30. Okay. So if you have no more questions to ask, you can just type in your names in the chat box and begin leaving the class. Thank you.